A very good evening and namaskar to everybody. Sri Sailesh Dobal, Editor, Business Standard, Sri Pascal Allen Nazareth, former Ambassador of India, Mrs. Isabel Nazareth, and the entire Nazareth family, the entire team of Business Standard, and particularly the awardees, distinguished invitees and guests, members from the press and media, ladies and gentlemen. I must thank the Business Standard and Ambassador Nazareth for requesting me to present this significant award this evening. I deem it an honor to present the Business Standard-Seema Nazareth Award for the year 2022. Seema Nazareth was born in New Delhi on 21st February 1975. Being the daughter of an ambassador, naturally she globe-trotted and was living in many countries. As her father was, as I told you, an ambassador and an IFS officer. She graduated in BA Economic Honours from Jesus and Mary College, New Delhi in June 1996, and she joined the staff as a staff writer by Business Standard in New Delhi, where she was appointed. She was transferred from many places, but ultimately she had to be in Bombay before she succumbed to her asthma on 19th March 1999 at a very young age of 24 years. Nazareth has presented me a book called Introspections, and I was going through it, and I thought that it would be very apt to read a few lines from her poem, The Warmth of Fulfillment, and I quote, "How heartwarming and full of meaning these pages are, as I careen sometimes numbly, sometimes humbly, but determinedly through these challenging days. Here lies a reminder that in all of life's experiences, it is a sense of perspective that pulls everything together. The warmth of fulfillment that is precious above all, the fulfillment of having stored the valor and persistence of these times. How great a tonic the times with nature prove, and essentially self-contained. Longing for quiet harbor and private pastures. Now I feel perhaps a dreary resignation, taking each new story dispassionately, consciously avoiding enthusiasm, which in these past months has often brought blind alleys. Today came the quiet surprise of a wholly candid source at SciComm. Who knows where it will lead? And I, who still dream of leads too, can only hope and pray." Unquote. This award has been instituted in the fond memory of Miss Seema Nazareth, who was powerful, eloquent, and articulate. By honoring her memory, we honor the spirit of independent journalism, the spirit of inquiry and objectivity, which are hallmarks of a vibrant democracy. A powerful testimony to Seema's legacy is by honoring a rising generation of young, articulate, and independent journalists who demonstrate exceptional caliber and moral promise. We have all already heard the two awardees. I extend my heartiest congratulations to Mr. Dhruv Saha, who is the winner of the Business Standard-Seema Nazareth Award for the year 2022, and Mr. Sarthak Chaudhary, who contributes to journalism and has been acknowledged by a special mention. I was sent a few pieces of the writings of the two awardees, and I was personally struck by the depth of Dhruv's reportage and the maturity of his analysis of rather sensitive issues. On reading some of Sarthak's writings, I found that he delivers not merely information but narratives. The color and detail with which varied challenges faced by the common man in India has been reported by him in a remarkable way. It appears to be that both the winners and many others gathered here are fierce believers of the aphorism, pen is mightier than the sword. On this occasion, I wish to speak a few words on the topic a free and balanced press and media, a sentinel of democracy. As we all know, freedom of expression has been humanity's yearning in times ancient and modern. It is said that where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. This is the word of Predecare of these are the Predecare of Cato, the renowned philosopher who influenced American thinking prior to its independence in 1776. One of the great historic claims to liberty in democratic societies, and one given special emphasis in contemporary debate, is the claim to speak, to publish, to know, and to make known. The claim to freedom of speech and expression, which includes the freedom of the press. The liberty of the press is often said to be the palladium of all civil and political liberties. Thus, in any society which aspires for democracy, freedom of speech and expression, which includes the freedom of the press, is critical. Therefore, a free and balanced press is fundamental to the life of an individual in a democratic society. The importance of the press, in my view, stems from the unique means it has at its disposal, that is, to gather, process, and disseminate information to large, widely dispersed, and heterogeneous audiences. Our founding fathers attached great importance to the freedom of speech and expression. The Indian Constitution, as we all know, does not employ the term freedom of press in Article 19(1)(a), while the Constitution of the United States of America expressly mentions the liberty of the press. But members of the Constituent Assembly hailed the guarantee of free speech, which was inclusive of the freedom of the press, as the Charter of Liberties, the crux of fundamental rights, etc. Whilst recognizing that without a free press there can be no free society, they realized that freedom of the press was not an end in itself, but a means to an end in a free society. Accordingly, our founding fathers, whilst guaranteeing the freedom of speech as a fundamental right, also enacted at the same time the heads on which permissive legislative restrictions could be imposed on its exercise in the form of Article 19(2) of the Constitution. The rationale justifying such treatment of Article 19(1)(a) along with 19(2) is that this freedom embraces a variety of rights. It embodies the right of the public to know. Informed public opinion is the most potent of all checks on maladministration. Should the press fail to play its role, it cannot legitimately be or morally invoke the protection of the constitutional guarantee of freedom. To this enlightened audience, I need not go over the various judgments which have been rendered by the Honorable Supreme Court, starting from Ramesh Thapar versus Union of India, where it was highlighted that the free flow of opinion and ideas is necessary to sustain collective life of the well-informed citizenry, which is a sine qua non for effective governance. Sakal Papers Private Limited, Bennett Coleman and Co., Prabhadat versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court appreciated the right of a journalist to interview the two prisoners who are on death penalty. In Indian Express 1985, the Supreme Court noted the media's role as the fourth estate, which is invaluable to democracy and therefore must be protected from executive interference. It noted that an excessive burden of taxation could not be placed on the media. Contemporaneously, when the question came up with regard to the validity of the notices issued for the demolition of the express buildings on Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg, the Supreme Court held that such notices were without justifiable cause and it was an interference on the freedom of the press and ultimately on democracy. Most recently, Madhyamam Broadcasting Limited versus Union of India is a case where the apex court, while holding that the denial of security clearance to operate a news channel is a restriction on the freedom of the press, and such a restriction is constitutionally permissible only on the grounds stipulated under Article 19.2, also that observed and underlined the importance of an independent and free press. The court, speaking through Chief Justice Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud, stressed on the pivotal role the free press plays in a democratic republic, and I would quote a passage from it. Quote, "The press has a duty to speak truth to power. At present, citizens with hard facts, enabling them to make choices that propel democracy in the right direction. Any restriction on the freedom of press compels citizens to think along the same tangent. A homogenized view on issues that range from socio-economic polity to political ideology would pose grave dangers to democracy." In that context, the court emphasized that critical views of the press on the government policy cannot be termed as anti-establishment. Having detailed the role of the press being a national trustee of vital public information and thereby justifying its claim for protection under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution, I might recall the words of the noted American writer Walter Lippmann, who said in a different context, and I quote, "For every right you cherish, you have a duty which you must fulfill. There is nothing for nothing any longer." Unquote. What then is the duty of the press? Journalists and the press are constantly engaged in the endeavor of simplifying complex information for the consumption of the public, which is often unaware of even the most elementary background of the facts underlying issues sought to be brought out. However, such simplification must go hand in hand with maintaining accuracy. The press sparks debates, deliberation, and discussion, which are the primary steps towards action. The media, as we all know, is the fourth pillar of democracy and the conception of the state, and thus an integral component of our democratic way of life. A functional and healthy democracy must encourage the development of a free press that can speak truth to power. The vibrancy, heterogeneity, and plurality of any democracy is compromised when the press is prevented from performing this task with all objectivity. The press must remain free if a country is to remain a democracy in the truest sense. While it is important that a democratic atmosphere is fostered where the press is capable of discussing and even critiquing government policy or action, attacking the government and constantly playing devil's advocate for the mere sake of it must not become the singular objective of a free press. A free press must neither be an ally or an advisory, but a constructive critic and an independent entity. However, it is necessary to identify certain broad principles that would ensure that a free press is also balanced, thereby exercising its freedom in the right spirit. The first challenge to tackle is of fake news, or what was earlier known as yellow journalism. In an attempt to sensationalize the news, it must not be rendered wholly inaccurately or in an exaggerated way or distorted. Fear-mongering and gossip-mongering as tactics to engage readers in their context is another practice that is to be shunned. It is the collective responsibility of journalists as well as other stakeholders to weed out any element of bias or prejudice in the process of reporting events. Fake news can misguide millions of people at once, and this will be in direct contradiction with the fundamentals of democracy, which forms the bedrock of our existence. Amidst the deluge of what is packaged as news by scores of 24-hour channels beamed through a television to our homes every day, perspectives are often distorted and a sense of proportion lost at times. Media literacy is therefore essential to helping people understand the messages that are being broadcast to them, the biases in media, and how they may affect the perception of an event or issue. With an overwhelming source of information, the need for media literacy is often more prevalent than ever. Unfortunately, sensationalism by the media makes it tougher for the average reader and or viewer to filter through sources. The state and the fourth estate have a responsibility to defer to each other's respective domains. In today's age of clickbait journalism, aimed at satisfying the increasingly short attention span of viewers, there exists a subtle but clearly defined line which should not be crossed. The art of journalism requires that light be shed on the nuances of any event in order to bring out its true complexity in totality. Therefore, it is critical that journalists give a complete picture of events and do not quote people, particularly those in public life, out of context. While this may serve the short term goal of increasing viewership or readership, it could have devastating effects for democracy. Further, agenda driven debates in the media, which are sometimes often ill informed, can also potentially hamper democracy by creating prejudices and bias in our society. It is in this context that I must emphasize that the mixing of media and politics, or specifically to say politics with journalism, is detrimental to the notion of free speech. The media owes its power and position to public trust. If the media is to retain its credibility and continue to enjoy that public trust, it must resist all onslaught on its freedom by political or private agenda. In order for the press as an institution to remain balanced, it is necessary to provide a voice to a multiplicity of perspectives and voices. This calls for diversity within the journalistic profession. By diversifying life experiences, narratives become more representatives. Moving on, I would like to say a few words on digital media, which represents a revolution in news reporting and broadcasting and has enabled enhanced reach of news and real-time reporting. With the pace and reach of news being accelerated because of digital media, it is additionally essential for journalism to be responsible and accurate. Never before have people had such quick access to such a high volume of information. However, it is necessary to bear in mind, particularly in the context of real-time reporting, that accuracy and attention to detail should not be compromised in the race to report an event. To this enlightened audience, I need not speak about regulation as such, as we have the Press Council of India, which is a body constituted under the Press Council Act 1978 to regulate content of news report. But as far as news channels are concerned, we are governed by the mechanism of self-regulation. However, it is to be understood that self-regulation alone is not adequate solution for two reasons. First, because self-regulation binds only those broadcasters who are willing to be a part of the association or submit to its jurisdiction. Enforceability has become a challenge for self-regulatory bodies. The second challenge stems from the fact that evolving technologies have enabled anyone to write and share content which is accessible by millions of people. There needs to be some form of regulation which binds this form of new age journalism as well. In evolving such a or regulatory mechanism, the following principles, which were endorsed by the Supreme Court in Indre Andhra Pradesh destruction of public and private properties, must be borne in mind, and I would state those. First, the trusteeship principle. Second, there should be an effective mechanism to address complaints against any media entity in a fair and just manner. Third, the balance principle. Further, that supervision, whether under a self-regulatory mechanism or otherwise, must not effectively turn into control, thereby stifling the freedom of the press or media. In my view, the answer lies at the intersection of state regulation and self-regulation. Responsible journalism through a free yet balanced press can be a lodestar that guides our democracy in the right direction. It has the potential to steer democracy forward by presenting the truth to the readers and or consumers of information. With these words, I would like to give a few words by way of parting. I must express my earnest hope that all journalists will navigate through their profession by maintaining the highest standards of accuracy, integrity, and responsibility in their reporting. This is because the right to freedom of speech and expression is subject to only those restrictions mentioned in Article 19(2) of the Constitution. It is a freedom sanctified by our Constitution, validated for over 7 decades. However, it is to be exercised with an understanding that with freedom comes responsibility towards the journalistic profession, towards the readers, and above all, towards democracy.